Wallace Wood was one of the finest artists to ever work in the medium of comics, one of my absolute favorites. But he died at the relatively young age of 54, and he was quoted as saying shortly before he died, "If I had to do it all over again, I'd cut off my hands." Wallace Wood had a tough life, but he also had an outsized impact on the industry. From the incredible comics he made in the 50s at EC Comics, to the superheroes of the Silver Age, to early success in self-publishing. In fact, he did so much that I really don't feel I can cover it all in one episode. Today, we're going to focus on just one aspect: Wallace Wood's early development and his work in the 1950s at EC Comics. Hello, welcome to Comic Tropes. I'm your host, Chris. Wallace Wood was always striving to be a better artist and find a way to do it better. And the guy could draw anything. Macho heroes, intricate sci-fi technology, lush environments, organic monsters, beautiful women. He was also one of the first celebrity comic artists, just making a name for himself in the first decade of his work. But before I get into all of that, I want to let you know that this episode is sponsored by the comic Guinevere and the Divinity Factory. Pocket Jacks Comics debuts Guinevere and the Divinity Factory in the April issue of Previews magazine. Order this gorgeous comic, set in a magical world, from your local comic book store. Guinevere must complete a test of character for Gatsby, the Great Wizard, by surviving a succubus's design on her soul. And my viewers can access a special PDF of the first issue at this link that's listed here, as well as in the description below. There's an excellent chance Wallace Wood would have liked this. He was well known for drawing beautiful women, from Power Girl to Sally Forth, but before he became famous for that, he had to break in. Wallace Wood. He did not like to be called Wally. He let his friends call him Woody. He was born in the middle of Minnesota in the summer of 1927 and moved around the area a bit, as his father was a lumberjack who would move where the work took him and his family. Wood's biographies point out that he and his father had a bit of an adversarial relationship, and he was a hard man to impress. Wood was into art and drawing from an early age, using the back of envelopes or anything else he could find to work on. His earliest influences were newspaper strip artists like Alex Raymond's Flash Gordon, Milton Caniff's Terry and the Pirates, and Hal Foster's Prince Valiant. By the 1940s, still as a teenager, Wood began experimenting with craft tint and duo shade so that he could create shading effects. Wood got a lot of life experience before breaking into comics. In 1944, he graduated from high school and signed up with the Merchant Marine, being stationed on the island of Hokkaido in Japan at the tail end of World War II. Wood then signed up with the Army in 1946 and became a paratrooper. He also completed one term at the Minneapolis School of Art in 1947. Wood finished his service by the summer of 1948 and moved to New York to get work as an artist. Wood was known for carrying around with him everywhere he went an absolutely massive portfolio of his work, and he was always hitting the streets, trying to drum up work, trying to break into the industry, hitting up every publisher he heard about. But he was having trouble. He was getting by with odd jobs, a little bit of help from his mother and older brother, who actually moved to New York with him at the time. And then his luck changed in the fall of 1948 with a chance meeting with another artist. In the fall of 1948, Wallace Wood met artist John Severin, who had also served in the Airborne. They began talking and found that they both admired artist Roy Crane. Severin had broken into the comics industry at EC and introduced Wood to his studio mates, Harvey Kurtzman and Will Elder. Kurtzman, Elder, and Severin had all been classmates at New York's High School of Music and Art, along with Al Jaffe and Al Feldstein, who all went on to work at EC Comics in the 1950s. The studio mates were impressed with Wallace Wood's portfolio and put him in touch with Will Eisner's studio, where Wood was hired to letter The Spirit for $3 a page. Simultaneously, Wood used his GI Bill to pay to go to school at the Byrne Hogarth's Cartoonist and Illustrator School, but ultimately dropped out after just one term as he continued to get professional work. As the 1940s closed out, Wood began collaborating with artists Harry Harrison and Joe Orlando. Harrison and Wood began getting work on romance comics in 1949 at publisher Fox. Right before that, Wood got some of his first paid illustrating jobs at American Comics Group with Romantic Adventures in spring of 1949 and Magazine Village's True Crime Comics in the fall of that year, where he got to collaborate with Alex Toth. Fox gave Harrison and Wood regular work but paid very low page rates. They paid around $23 a page for a 10-page story. But Wood said the art director who handed out assignments would ask for $5 a page as a kickback. Wood said that he'd just rush out all of the pages and only spend effort on a good splash page to put on top of the pages they turned in, and that Fox had no quality control, so they never questioned it. Sometimes, Wood and Harrison would get jobs drawing for Fox through an art agent named Ronaldo Epworth, but he would only pay them half the page rate, and he'd sell complete stories to Fox. Wood was also taking other jobs at companies like Avon, but what really spurred him to push his career forward was Fox going out of business. They owed Wood, Harrison, and Orlando around $6,000, which they never got. Joe Orlando briefly quit comics over the experience and went to work in a stockroom in Long Island. Quite a different career path than the DC Comics executive he ultimately ended up at. Harrison and Wood, as a duo, kept looking around for more work and eventually showed their published work to EC Comics in 1949, where editor Al Feldstein hired them on the spot for $26 a page. If there was one advantage to the low page rates of the day, it meant that only the artists who were both fast and could deliver excellent work were getting that published work. And that's not fair, it just meant that the cream of the crop was rising to the top. Wallace Wood was an incredibly fast and talented artist, and he was known for having a huge reference file of key poses and interesting backgrounds that he could copy. He had an artograph machine that allowed him to trace things very quickly. He even posted on his studio a famous motto. Wallace Wood said, "Never draw what you can copy, never copy what you can trace, and never trace what you can cut out and paste up." Wallace Wood was all about being efficient with his time. At the same time, 40 to 60-hour work weeks were the norm, and it was completely normal to spend up to 12 hours or so at the desk drawing in one session. Wallace Wood was constantly pushing himself artistically and also focused on inking well. He would ink Harrison's work a lot of the time and really make it look like his own. Wood gained a reputation as one of the best inkers in the business. In 1952, Wood inked over artist Jules Feiffer for 8 weeks on The Spirit as Eisner decided to turn it into a space sci-fi story. But the syndicate asked Eisner to bring it back to grounded crime story. By 1958, Jack Kirby hired Wood to ink him on a new comic strip called Sky Masters of the Space Force. But Wood made his name as a good inker and sci-fi artist at EC as the 50s began. EC started Harrison and Wood out on romance stories in the winter of 1949, moving into 1950. Titles like Saddle Romances. Romances and westerns were the popular genres at the time, and Wood and Harrison's first work at EC was issue 13 of Gunfighter from January of 1950. Wood was more interested in drawing crime, but most of those jobs were going to the team of Al Feldstein and Johnny Craig. One exception was War Against Crime, issue 11 from February of 1950. These stories were collaborations, but Wood said his first comic story by just him was either Captain Steve Savage for Avon or Captain Science for Youthful, both from 1950. But EC was about to make some big changes. In 1950, EC Comics launched its New Trend initiative, launching a bunch of new titles. They had the war book, Two-Fisted Tales. They had the crime book, Crime Suspense Stories, and they had horror books like Tales from the Crypt. Now, at the same point, Harrison and Wood had been bugging publisher Bill Gaines to start a sci-fi comic, and he gave in. He also launched at the same time Weird Science. These books were all launched in the first few months of 1950. Wallace Wood's life was changing for the better professionally at the same time as it changed personally. In the winter of 1950, Wood met Dutch student Tatiana Wood, who was taking dressmaking jobs and attending night classes at the Trophagen School of Fashion. She began dating Wood and eventually stopped going to school. They had a simple marriage at the city's municipal building at the end of August 1950. Tatiana would go on to assist with ruling lines or blacking out areas of Wood's panels, and eventually broke into the comics industry as a well-respected colorist on books like Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. As the 1950s closed out, editor Al Feldstein stepped in and helped Wood evolve his art. In issue 228 of Wizard magazine, Feldstein explained the story to Jim McLaughlin, saying, quote, "I had given Harrison and Wood a few assignments and quickly came to realize that Wally was being exploited by Harry, and that the work was actually all Wally's. I managed to have a private conversation with Wally, encouraging him to free himself from Harry, and told him I would give him work if he did. The rest is history." Wood began doing covers for EC with September's Weird Science issue 9. Wood said that by 1952, he looked at his old art and decided to work on simplifying it and getting less cluttered. One exception was his work for Mad magazine, where he jam-packed the panels with visual gags. But in May of 1952, Wood had 4 stories published in EC's comics that really proved his prowess as an illustrator. There was Custer's Last Stand, with its claustrophobic panels highlighting a massive attacking force closing in on the main character. War of 1812 featured pages bathed in shadows that highlighted the desperate humanity of the lead character. He Walked Among Us was a sci-fi story that featured lush, highly detailed backgrounds and use of special tints to give shading to the hero's clothes and physique. Home to Stay is an excellent example of the detailed, imaginative, and believable science fiction equipment that Wood excelled at. Wood considered his best cover something from this period, issue 23 of Weird Science Fantasy from spring of 1954. Wood blended technical excellence with interesting panel compositions, dramatic shading, and environments that felt tangible. He liked using reference and pulled from his own life. His time in Japan was useful for his backgrounds of Nagasaki in the story Atom Bomb from Two-Fisted Tales, issue 22. His paratrooper training influenced the realism of the Avon Comics title With the U.S. Paratroops Behind Enemy Lines. Wood was respected by his peers and was also known for having a sense of humor. He would tape gags on pages he delivered to EC that could never be printed, things like naked women or a gigantic penis on a horse. That was his sense of humor, but he also filled his Mad pages with dozens of visual gags on every panel. EC was finally giving Wood both the pay and the recognition he deserved. His page rate climbed from $45 a page for comics to $200 a page for his work in Mad magazine. Issue 22 of Weird Science featured the story My World, which went meta by featuring Wood himself telling the story to the audience. There was also an artist profile with a photo and details about Wallace Wood in the March-April 1952 issues of EC Comics. Readers could put a face to the exceptional artwork, and Wood became one of the first celebrity comic book artists. Wallace Wood said he loved working with the EC style of the pre-lettered pages because it meant that whatever he drew, he knew it wasn't going to be covered up. It was already laid out. He could go home and just be creative. He felt like that there were no real restrictions on the artwork. Now, the trade-off was that he was working incredibly long hours, and he kept himself going with coffee, and Marlboro cigarettes. In fact, he smoked so much he gave himself a permanent squint. And vacations, he pretty much never took them. But finally, in 1960, after a full decade of doing amazing artwork for EC Comics, in 1960, he and his wife Tatiana finally took a well-earned vacation across Europe. According to Tatiana, it was a 6-week trip all throughout Europe. Wallace was taking photographs of architecture for later reference, and during this vacation, his headache started. Tatiana points out that people say Wood suffered from migraines, but she clarified that it was one headache that never went away. Wood visited the New York Hospital Headache Clinic and many private doctors, but it was never diagnosed, and it would only get worse throughout his life. Going into the 1960s, Wood began to have outbursts of anger where he'd kick over chairs or slam his hand down because the headache just wouldn't go away, and he had to power through deadlines. Wood was the only original Mad artist to work on every issue for the entire 1950s. Jump forward to 1964, and Wood had powered through his migraine to deliver a story for Mad which was covered in correction fluid as Wood struggled to perfect his pages. It was rejected. This was the first rejection he'd received at EC, and he took offense, quitting on the spot. EC Comics' loss was Superhero Comics' gain, but there is a lot more to talk about when it comes to Wallace Wood's life and artwork, but it warrants its own separate episode at this point. What's worth noting is that at this point, Wallace Wood was dealing with these migraines, and he could not get relief from the doctors. He began self-prescribing alcohol to numb the pain, and that led to further health issues. We'll deal with that later. What's worth noting is that if you want to see some masterful artwork, look at anything Wallace Wood did in his time at EC Comics. Just absolutely some of the best comics ever produced. He's incredible. One of my favorites. He could do anything, in my opinion. That said, he was dealing with these health issues, and towards the end of his life, one of his final interviews was with Sheldorf, in which he told him, "Drawing comics is like sentencing yourself to life imprisonment at hard labor in solitary confinement. I don't think I'd do it again." I may be paraphrasing slightly, but it sort of shows where his mind was at. It's a bit of a sad story sometimes. At the same time, he left us with an incredible volume of work because he could work so fast. Just an incredible creator. I highly recommend reading more about Wallace Wood and reading his artwork if you don't know that stuff already. One of my favorites. Thank you so much for being with me today. I will do more episodes about Wallace Wood. They're coming. Meantime, we're going to switch gears and do a slightly different episode next week. But until I see you next time, just remember, keep reading comics. Hey everybody, thanks again for watching. Thank you to my lovely patrons for making this possible. Thank you for just watching, and if you can hit things like and subscribe, that sincerely helps the channel. Also, huge thanks to Preston Poulter, the writer of Guinevere and the Divinity Factory. Again, he's given you access to a bunch of the comics with this link, and you can order that at your comic book store. It's in Previews magazine. So congratulations, Preston. It's no easy feat to put together a huge comic book and get it out there to all of the comic book stores out there. Huge accomplishment. Thank you so much for sponsoring this episode. It means a lot to me. I have been so busy, folks, with the show, but it does bring me a lot of pleasure. I am dealing with, as usual, right, some mental health issues. I'm definitely battling depression. Makes me feel exhausted, but I do really love doing this show, and I think the feedback is tremendous. It gives me a lot of ideas for future episodes, so I appreciate that. And just giving you a heads up, there is another channel where I do even more comic book content. If you don't know about it, the channel is called Pros and Cons. I do a weekly live stream for about 2 hours or so where I recap comic book news. I give quick reviews on the comics that I've read this week, and a lot of times we have an interview. Really fun. That channel also hosts things that I do with Jim Mafood and I will review bad movies on Trash Movie Bonanza. So Little different than what I do on this channel, but there is more content that I'm putting out. You might like that. Thank you so much for watching. It means everything to me. I will see you real soon. Take care. Finally, turn the tables? What am I gonna say there? They owed Wood, Harrison, and went to work in a stockroom in a... EC started Harrison, the war Dutch student,